Rain tapped against the glass with a patient rhythm, like fingers drumming on a locked door. No one would answer. I sat at my desk, half awake, the radio still playing, even though I hadn't touched the dial for hours. Every station slipped into the same sound, a low note, constant and unwavering, as though the air itself was humming. It was too precise for static, too steady for the messy clutter of interference I grew used to on stormy nights. I leaned closer, the glow of the old receiver painting the room in orange. The hum did not crackle or shift, not even as the storm outside strengthened. At first I smiled, tired enough to think it was some pirate broadcast, a prankster looping tones to unsettle insomniacs like me. I almost let it lull me. The steady vibration seemed to press against my chest, a strange comfort in its persistence. But then I checked the recorder. I had been leaving it running out of habit, capturing late-night fragments for an archive project. On its screen, a timestamp burned, 0 hours 13 minutes and 7 seconds. My notes told me that exact minute matched an Antarctic weather feed, one designed to stream raw data bursts to satellites. There was no chance my old desktop radio could intercept ice floor wind reports from the far end of the world. Yet the numbers lined up, precise. The more I played it back, the less it resembled noise. Buried in the hum was a breath. Not a gust, not feedback. A breath, drawn shallow and strained, as though someone leaned just beside the microphone. I replayed 30 seconds again and again, each time feeling the small hairs shift on my arms. With headphones pressed tight, it became harder to deny. A body, a presence. Nothing mechanical. I told myself sleep would fix it, but I didn't move from the chair. Curiosity twisted around me like the wires snaking across the floor. If someone piggybacked their broadcast onto global weather bands, the logistics alone meant deliberate craft, knowledge I didn't believe belonged to prank channels or bored hackers. They needed access, clearance, cables running cold beneath government towers. And still, all I heard was breathing dot by 2 a.m. The rain had soaked through the netting outside, spreading shadows across my shelves. I pulled notebooks closer, writing down every frequency drift, every second where the hum dipped half a pitch, then steadied itself again. My own voice spoke the time into a handheld recorder, proof for later when memory started shaping ghosts into patterns. I didn't trust myself anymore. The sound was too intimate. I couldn't escape the thought that it was listening to. Sleep never came. The following evening I dug into archives, public servers, half-forgotten repositories, no longer indexed. Each reference to Antarctic broadcasts was clinical. Pressure readings, wind velocity, statistical blocks no one without clearance should care about. Yet tucked between dry tables, fragments appeared that didn't match the format. Strings of numbers that repeated across decades. They were shorter, and when plotted against time zones, they formed coordinates. One coordinate landed squarely on a research station decommissioned after only 3 months. Officially, funding issues had shut it down. Unofficial chatter, the kind that circulates among graduate students and night security workers, said equipment kept failing in ways no one could explain. Yet here I was, years later, hearing a feed crackling with presence, as though the project had never stopped. At my kitchen table, papers spread in uneven stacks, I realized I'd already decided what to do. Tracing a signal like this meant following the trail into records sealed under layers of permissions. Every document I drew closer to became harder to reach, as though doors shut themselves quietly just as I approached. I braced myself against frustration, knowing whoever left the broadcast running counted on weariness to turn me away. When I replayed the file, the breath was clearer. A pause between the intake and release lined up with pressure drops noted in the Antarctic weather bursts, as if the very sky exhaled through the radio. I shut the laptop quickly, staring instead at the darkened window where rain carved silver veins down the glass. Behind my reflection, the street was empty. No engines, no voices, Just water falling into deeper stillness. The silence after switching off the recording was worse than the hum. I kept waiting for it to start up again on its own. I flipped through my notebooks, seeking logic, reassurance that numbers made sense, that coincidences stacked cleanly. But deep inside I knew I had crossed some point of no return. The data suggested this wasn't a random intrusion or fault in the storm. Someone or something wanted the pattern noticed. And I had noticed by 3 I was dialing through bands manually, letting the hiss wash over me until the tone returned. Every time it emerged, I felt the room contract, as if walls leaned closer. Into that compressed space came the faintest trace of another sound, ribs straining, lungs refusing silence. It wasn't mine. I held my own breath, proved it belonged only to the signal. I thought of the neglected station under the ice, its corridors frozen shut, lights extinguished but still wired to satellites. The thought that a voice, or what passed for one, had never left. That it lingered, steady as the cold pressure in the sea, until someone careless tuned in and received it. Until me. The rational path would be to close the archive, back up the file, write a report none of my colleagues would ever read. But instead, I found myself searching maps marked with cables and undersea lines, looking for the white spaces where oversight dimmed. My fingers stopped over a cluster where records bled out, untraceable. No reason for the omission, just blankness where signal might live. The hum rose again as though responding to the attention. It wove through my head until I could no longer tell which notes belonged to the receiver and which hummed directly inside me. Threads pulled tighter the more I tried to resist, strands of sound binding thought itself. By dawn, words on the pages blurred into meaningless scratches. What was left was not study, but compulsion. To follow the trail meant stepping where no reassurance existed. Into layers of files that had been sealed, not because they lacked value, but because something beneath. Antarctica was still awake. The broadcast was no error, no prank. It was an invitation hidden in coordinates, masked as weather reports. Every door I opened revealed another, darker one behind it. And now, on the edge of morning drizzle, my search has shown me the last of those doors. Configurations that have no names, patterns I can trace but not comprehend. A doorway implied by absence, where records thin into nothing. A door untraceable, except that the sound is already drawing me closer, already pulling me inside. And I cannot tell if the breath waiting past that threshold is mine or something else. The next night, I sat hunched over the desk. Spectrum logs stacked high, their columns of numbers and shifting peaks swimming in the lamplight. I moved methodically, though my pulse ran faster than the rain's patter. Every station I tested, every sliver of bandwidth I combed, carried the same undercurrent. The hum. Faint at times, buried under voices and music, but always there, always the same unwavering pitch, like a second heartbeat echoing through the machines. It didn't matter whether I scanned local FM chatter or faraway AM talk shows from across the states. Beneath them lay that throbbing floor, masked but undeniable. I highlighted entries across maps, my notes growing wild. Wisconsin, Montana, Virginia, each marked with the same spectral band. A frequency slice that official indexes labeled as restricted defense communications riding the atmosphere, designed to skip along ionized air over the poles. They were military corridors, quiet lanes you weren't supposed to glimpse, much less step into. Yet in each window, the hum curled, settled, and remained, as though it lived there alongside encrypted signals no civilian could decode. I paused, fingers sore from writing. The room felt wrong, stretched out as if distance itself had shifted. My chair creaked when I leaned back, startled by the emptiness pressing closer than walls. I fought the urge to power everything down. Curiosity clamped too hard already. One page of my notes was scrawled with a single word, over and over, in half-legible circles: Antarctica. I didn't remember writing it that way, yet the ink was mine. I sent messages through late-night nodes where hobbyists and amateurs swapped oddities. Part of me hoped no one would answer, that I could dismiss this entire pursuit as paranoia fed by storms and sleeplessness. But the replies trickled in. One of them, a name I recognized only vaguely from old message boards, asked to speak directly. We connected after midnight. His voice on the line rasped with the wear of years behind transceivers. He had heard it too. Not once, not by chance, but systematically, across frequencies and geographies, all threaded back into that same band. At first he joked, told me it was probably stray carrier tones bleeding through government networks. Then his tone collapsed into warning. He said people walked away from these signals. They abandoned their equipment. Their names vanished from lists. He told me to stop. He said if I didn't, the silence would find me. I asked what he meant, but he shut down. The line dropped with a crack like distant lightning. I stared at the receiver, wondering if he'd hung up or if something else had cut the feed. Either way, the warning rooted itself deep, festering against the thrill of discovery. Silence as a threat. I tried imagining what it meant, but the thought slid away like ice from warm hands. I turned again to the recording, headphones framing my skull tight. The hum rolled through, constant as my pulse. But layered now came something nearer, brittle and sharp. At first I thought it was distortion, until it repeated. A crunch, a shift. The granular grind of ice slabs fracturing against one another, exact, steady, too deliberate to be random static. My breath shortened. It felt as if the room itself carried frozen weight, pressure rising until my teeth ached. I yanked the headphones off. The air around me remained heavy, tinged with vibration even miles from any glacier. Against reason, I pressed play again. The sound persisted, the ice right there, moving toward me. Every crack followed measured intervals, like a metronome guiding the hidden broadcast. A beacon. That word slotted too cleanly into mine to ignore. I combed my notes again, circling. Each path led back to Antarctica. Coordinates that matched abandoned stations. References that were never references, just half-buried anomalies in reports. The southern continent was not merely geographic backdrop, but a nexus, silent while the rest of the map quaked with chatter. The hum had chosen that vault of ice as its corridor, and through that blankness, it traveled across every state, insinuating itself beneath ordinary noise. The clock struck 3. Rain had slowed to mist, the glass fogged with my breath. The files spread around me looked less like evidence and more like a lattice, lines all crossing at a single frozen heart I had never seen. The broadcast wasn't hiding. It was pulsing openly, confident no one would listen long enough to unravel it. But I was listening. More than that, I was being drawn, like a moth tracking vibration instead of light. Each hour I replayed the sample, headphones pressed tighter, the ice splintering deeper inside the tone. It grew harder to tell where sound ended and imagination began. My own pulse began syncing with the rhythm, my chest aching with the strain of breathing against an unseen tide. Still I wrote. Still I circled, the pen returning again and again to that same word. Antarctica. The ink scarred the page until the paper threatened to tear. That night ended without sleep. When dawn came, it felt gray and irrelevant, as if day held no power beyond the hum's reach. My windows reflected only the tired twist of my face, pale in early light. I understood then that the silence he warned of might not sound like absence at all. It might come roaring, disguised as presence, until everything I knew was drowned in one ceaseless note. The log file sat open, coordinates staring back, all pointing south. I closed my eyes and still saw the word burning. Antarctica, written by my own hand again and again. As if I had known all along where the trail would end. And under the beat of my pulse. I swear I could hear ice moving. The files arrived thin, black lines streaked with redactions. as though fire had chewed through the words before I could. My freedom of information request had returned only fragments. Most were sterile descriptions of barometric pressure and wind shear, dry enough to dissolve thought. But tucked inside was a phrase that made my throat close. Unauthorized carrier overlap. It appeared 3 times, buried in medical-grade jargon, during storms that had swept the South Pole Station at odd intervals. I stared at the folders spread across my desk. Carrier overlap. The words didn't belong in weather reports. They belonged in telecommunications logs, codes engineers used when signals fought for space. Yet here they were, printed in calm bureaucratic type, lingering in reports meant to measure wind speed. Something had bled into their instruments, and someone had decided to name it in the only way they could without saying what it was. Outside, rain ticked against the window like a fingernail against glass. The storm leaned hard on my walls, its rhythm folding into the soft hiss of machines. I played back last night's recording, headphones clamped too tight, and skipped to the timestamp that matched one of their entries. Then it came, a pulse. 3 seconds long. The sound pressed against my ears until I felt it in my teeth, a resonance that rattled faintly against the casing of the mic itself. When it receded, silence felt heavier than any sound. I measured it again. The intervals were exact. Not a wavering tone like stray radio noise, but sculpted. Designed. Whoever had kept the log at the South Pole had noticed it too, or else they would not have named it. Overlap meant it intruded on something else. Unauthorized meant they had no control over its origin. Someone already knew. I moved papers out of the way and set both recordings side by side on the waveform software. My own midnight hum unfolded across the screen, dense, steady, unwavering. Their pulse, recorded halfway across the world 10 years ago, merged with it perfectly. No drift, no inconsistency. A signal that refused time. The pen slipped in my hand. I left smears against the notebook as I circled the phrase again and again. If their instruments registered what mine had caught, this was not apparition. It was structure. The thought made something shift inside me. Until now, I could cling to the slim chance I was chasing ghosts of circuits, private interference, tricks of weather bouncing off the ionosphere. That excuse dissolved under the precision. It was not me. It was not local. It was everywhere. I replayed until the pulse crawled between my ribs. With each repetition, my mind pulled phantom weight against my skin, the sense of something vast shuddering far beneath the ice. Rain streaked down the glass until all that remained of the outside was blurred shadow, dark trees bending in wind. I closed my eyes, but the pulse stayed. Behind it, whispers leaked through, threads as thin as mist. Some stretched syllables, others curt gasps. My breath quickened. I could no longer tell which belonged to playback and which belonged to the air inside the room. I told myself imagination claws shapes where none live, but the tape kept whispering. Between pulses I caught tremors riding the noise floor, fragments that resembled fragments of speech. Unfamiliar language, or maybe something simpler. Just human cadence broken and scattered, the shadow of breath sliced by static. Every surge aligned with rain, hammering harder against the house as though storm and recording fed one another, pressed my palms into my eyes until colors burned. Sleep might have grounded me, but rest abandoned this place weeks ago. I turned again to the log, tracing every entry I could salvage. Each mention of carrier overlap followed violent weather, storms that scoured the polar plateau until meters of ice peeled away. Events noted without commentary. Storms arrive, overlap occurs, then silence returns. The writing was clinical, even bored, yet the repetition betrayed awareness. Someone knew, and chose not to explain. The phrase returned like a refrain, through my thoughts, unauthorized. Carrier. Overlap. I whispered each word aloud. Slower each time, mapping them against the pulse. It matched. Unauthorized like intrusion. Carrier like vehicle. Overlap like trespass. As if something hidden lashed onto the free lines of data and rode them until discovered. But discovered decades ago. Whoever redacted the documents chose to leave those words visible, like a mark burned faintly into the page. Proof they had seen and caged it long before me. My headphones groaned with the load when I pushed the volume higher than safe. The hum surged, followed by the 3-second pulse that bowed the hollow air around me. My shelves trembled. Dust shifted. I could feel vibration through my elbows braced against the wooden desk. This was not an abstract echo. This touched matter. It pressed into things, left fingerprints. I thought again of my contact's voice on the line warning me. The silence will find you. Perhaps this was what he meant. Not absence. The silence filled by structured tone. Bleed that swallows every other frequency until only one rhythm remains. A silence dense enough to erase, to smother everything except itself. The rain kept slipping deeper into the recording, weaving itself with static until I no longer trusted the difference. Windows rattled. For half a moment I heard a whisper too sharp to ignore, my name, dragged across the edges of interference, mangled but intact. I bit hard into my lip until blood surfaced, forcing myself back into sine waves and logs, the cold precision of numbers. Somewhere in the debris of reports, my gaze snagged on a pen-scrawled marginalia barely spared by the photocopier's teeth. A technician had scribbled frustration. Resonance again 3 seconds, exactly. Then the line, microphone casing vibrated. The exact words I had just written myself. Separate continents, separate years, identical result. There was no more refuge in coincidence. I shut off the monitor, but the pulse persisted inside me, steady as another heart layered atop my own. Shadows shifted in the room, guided less by light than by the rhythm bending the air. I set the documents aside, but the phrase burned behind my eyelids. Unauthorized carrier overlap. A record that should not exist, and yet did. Folded neat inside the archives like bait. The whisper returned softer but closer, brushing my ear where no mouth lingered. I told myself it was storm. I told myself it was imagination. Still my hand rose involuntarily to cover the side of my face, as though to shield against breath that wasn't there. I switched on the recorder, listening again, desperate for proof. All it granted was rain merging with static, erasing certainty, or maybe confirming it. The distinction no longer mattered. Somehow someone had named this intrusion, filed it quietly, and closed the drawer. And by finding it, I had pulled the drawer wide open again. The basement smelled of paper left too long in cold air, dust sealed by silence. I had convinced the university librarian that my request was harmless research for a private project. She hesitated, then handed me a ring of keys that clinked like small bones. The concrete steps sank lower than I expected. Each turn betrayed a draft colder than the last until I reached a steel door. Its frame gouged from years of carts forced through. Inside weighted shelves stacked with forgotten reels. Cardboard boxes and binders bowed with damp. Faded labels struggled against time. Words like polar atmospheric log, transmission anomalies, and dates ranging back decades stared through dust. The boxes creaked when I pulled one free. Inside, reels gleamed faint under dim fluorescence. Magnetic ribbon wound tight, but strained at the edges. The first reel resisted the player. Tape spooling uneven, catching on guides, squealing with age before the head aligned. A burst of static exploded into the room. My shoulders stiffened. The first voice came seconds later, clipped mid-sentence, researchers trading weather data in practice tones. Their cadence froze between breaths. Then the hum arrived. Thick, low, unwavering, dragging across the tape until words collapsed beneath it. My pen trembled at the desk, ink trailing as I leaned forward. On the reel box, someone had scrawled comments in pencil, unexpected carrier bleed phantom? Another entry, not local glitch, repeating. Then a final shaky note, we'll catalog later. But later never arrived. Nothing followed after that page. Their careful annotations ended abruptly, leaving only hums sprawled across recordings meant to measure wind. I set another reel on, fingers shaking, the smell of brittle ribbon rising each time it unwound. More voices, lighter at first, men and women trading functional data. When the hum seeped in, one chuckled, the sound of someone pretending not to worry. A second voice joined, nervous laughter folded into the static like bones cracking behind walls. Then silence, as though a hand had pressed against their mouths and held them quiet. My chest tightened. I swapped reels faster than my notes could keep up, trying to chase continuity. But each tape fractured. Sentences hung half-finished. The hum claimed them one by one, burying syllables until only vibration remained. Decades dissolved into sameness. I needed another set of ears. I carried a reel to my friend, a sound engineer who worked nights at a nearby studio. His skepticism curdled when he saw the condition of the tape, but agreed to try. We threaded it through equipment far gentler than my player. The file smoothed as the machine digitized. He leaned forward, twisting knobs, isolating sound thick with static. The hum steadied, clean now, stripped of dust and decay. That was when he froze. I leaned closer. Beneath the hum lived layers. Not one note, but several stacked high, chords that pierced like shards of glass struck from inside metal. The structure bent in ways no throat could shape, harmonics folding on themselves, spiraling where breath could never go. We listened, both faces pale in monitor glow. The chord did not feel discovered. It felt aimed. He pushed away from the console. His voice broke quiet. That isn't natural resonance. It's arranged. He didn't want to continue, I could tell. Curiosity cut deeper in me, though. I asked him to play it again, just once more, and he shook his head before leaving the booth. The doors swung back slowly, as though weighed down by air thicker than it should be. I remained with the file, listening as the harmonics spiraled higher, then collapsed back into the root hum with perfect symmetry. No storm on earth arranges itself like this. The word phantom had appeared in their notes, but this was no phantom. This was composition, structured long before I tuned in with cheap radios and late hours. Strands of history wound through layers of tape, none younger than 30 years, all carrying the mark like a brand. The archive's silence was broken only by shallow drips echoing from pipes overhead. The weight of all that frozen data pressed on me. Boxes lined floor to ceiling, each filled with reels, each possibly harboring the same intrusion, the same stolen space where voices vanished and hum reigned. Suddenly the room felt not forgotten but guarded, as though abandonment was deliberate. I collected what I could. Photocopied annotations, reels digitized quickly, my notebook swelling with ink until pages crinkled under my fingers. With each comparison, the pattern deepened. Pulses aligned decade to decade. Harmony stayed precise, no drift, no loss. A signal living through time as if untouched. Broadcast cycles should scatter, degrade, lose purity across years of bounce and atmosphere. This one stayed perfect. The engineer refused to speak further when I called. His only message, don't bring more. His silence spoke louder than any warning. Alone, I played again, pressing headphones so tight my jaw ached. Harmonies massed until my breath staggered. I felt trespass in each second, body aching from sound that pushed against biology. My notebook filled with words insistent, circling themselves into repeating structures. Trespass, unauthorized, beacon, Antarctica. The laughter I'd heard on tapes returned in memory. Strained attempts to dismiss what they heard. Their notes ended not because they understood, but because something stopped them from continuing. My curiosity deepened with terror shadowing every frame. Had I unearthed what they salvaged at risk? Were these reels meant to be buried under dust forever, far beneath the city's ordinary life? In the still hours before dawn, I copied the files again to hidden drives, but even as I stored them, I felt possession pulling. The archive had not relinquished. It had given me leash. The hum threaded from tape into walls, through the rain outside, into the marrow of the night. At times I thought I heard it without speakers, vibrating faintly beneath my desk, under the steps leading back to daylight. By the time I locked the basement door again, my hands were numb. The keys rattled against each other, but their sound seemed smaller than the one pounding inside my head. I carried the reels upstairs, knowing I should never return them, knowing also this was only the beginning. The frozen archive had awakened beneath my touch, and somewhere beneath layers of static and time, something waited for me to keep listening. The room was darker than usual, though every lamp still burned. Shadows stretched long and deliberate, each corner carrying more weight than it should. I sat hunched at the desk, tapes piled high like graves of magnetic ribbon around me. My recorder spun, the reels ticking with a patient hunger. I pressed play. The hum came first, low enough to crawl under my ribs. Then familiar crashes of static, the brittle outlines of ice shifting miles away. I scribbled notes, careful not to lose detail. But when the interference broke sudden, I froze. Between the scrapes and bursts was something sharp. 2 syllables. Bent, stretched, distorted across the carrier drop. But the rhythm was too precise, the stress too familiar. My jaw locked. It sounded like my name. At first I laughed under my breath, the release of tension collapsing into soundless shakes. I told myself about pareidolia, the trick of ears seeking patterns in chaos. Brains map familiarity onto noise, hungry for recognition. That must be what I heard, or wanted to hear. But when the name came again, half-formed, gasping, tangled in distortion at the same measured interval, I gripped my pen tighter until the plastic cracked. I marked the timestamp. The exact moment my free hand had tightened on the recorder's casing while writing notes. The pulse arrived then, the syllables stitched in perfect counterpoint. Not just coincidence. The noise had waited, breathing between shifts of my body. Knowing the pressure of my fingers curling around the device, mirroring it back in the line of static. Cold rushed through me. I replayed 3 times, angling my head differently, coaxing other explanations. But the more I fought, the clearer it grew. The inflection was wrong, stretched by distortion, but the cadence was right. The emphasis where my name always hung. The air around the desk thickened, making each breath sharp, shallow. My notebook blurred as sweat slid down my face, blotting ink. I forced myself to step back, though I kept headphones pressed against temples like shackles. Static clawed at me, folding new shapes around the hum. Every few distortions, I heard it again. My name. My identity fixed into Antarctic echo, vibrating in rooms where it could never belong. I told myself to stop. To pull the plug, burn the tapes, end the chase tonight. Yet my hand moved only to rewind. My throat felt lined with frost as I realized what this meant. The signal wasn't distant anymore. It knew me. It folded me inside itself. Somewhere in that far black plateau, something spoke not in words, but in recognition, dragging me frame by frame toward it. The hum swelled into phases. 3-second pulses crashing through the speakers. Each left a tremor along the desk's surface, a rattle in my teeth. I began scrawling notes too quickly for clarity, circles tangled across one another, ink bruising the page. In every circle the same syllables carved themselves again. My name transcribed in loops, uncontrolled. The paranoia cracked wider. I looked over my shoulder, toward the shadow-bound corners of the room. The rain outside blurred the glass until the street vanished, replaced by streaks of silver static bleeding through. I thought I saw figures shifting just past vision, watching the headphones clutch my skull. I yanked them off. Yet the name lingered, not in the speakers, not in my ears, but inside the silence itself. I moved to the shelves where old notebooks stacked, flipping frantically. Page after page filled with coordinates, waveforms, logs. But here and there I found it again, written unconsciously perhaps. Scribbled in margins, my name repeated though I had no memory of writing it. Old ink, old handwriting. Months before tapes, before FOIA files, before Antarctica whispered. Already there. I grabbed the tape again, desperate to prove myself wrong. Headphones slammed back. The reel twisted into distortion, coughing bursts of static. Then the breath. Then the syllables. My name, raw, broken, shredded inside carrier bleed. Always offset by the beat of my motions, as though the signal watched more intently than anything human ever could. Fear melted into something heavier. A stake lodged itself deep, beyond choice. This was not study anymore. Not pastime curiosity. I could not walk away. The sound carried me inside itself, until my own being vibrated with its rhythm. The Antarctic hum was no longer outside, not some phantom drifting across polar storms. It lived here, now tracing lines along my nerves, seeding my name inside its pattern. One tape snarled, ribbon twisting against the capstan in a shriek. My breath hitched, chest seizing as the sound warped. For a moment, every syllable of my name echoed at once, layered, harmonized in chords unnatural and unbearable. I yanked the plug, silence collapsing like a lid slamming over me. But within seconds, the resonance returned, softer, contained. It lived in the quiet now. I sat unmoving, palms pressed to ears, heart sprinting. My reflection in the window felt off. The eyes stared hollow, lips parted as though repeating faint syllables in rhythm with the static. I reached out to touch glass. My name seemed to run down it with the rain, vanishing only to appear again as streaks of warped light. Every wall felt porous. Not paper or paint, but thin membrane humming. The house itself vibrated faintly, as though tuned by invisible strings. My hand shook picking up the pen again. I meant to sketch waveforms, to ground thought in science. Instead, the paper filled with my name, written without pause, first neat, then jagged, then spiraling loops until the page shredded near the binding. I whispered aloud to empty air, demanding proof. The silence pressed back heavy, until the static from the unplugged recorder bled faintly, impossible, yet undeniable. The syllables rose again, faint enough to pass his imagination, strong enough to break me open. Some parts shivered at what this meant. The signal subscribed to no distance anymore. Carrier overlap, pulses, harmonics, all had pointed outward, away, to forbidden Antarctic storms. But now it pointed in, carving my own identity into its map. I had become part of the cycle. One repetition among decades of phantom voices. I should have abandoned everything. Yet my pulse raced with hunger doubled now by terror. To know my name lived inside the hum was to burn with need to uncover why, how long, and what else it meant. To hear yourself returning from static is to realize nothing about you is yours anymore. And tonight, as the rain dies down and the silence stretches deeper than I can stand, I know beyond denial, whatever hides in the static knows I am listening. And it will not stop speaking my name. The cafe was nearly empty when he arrived, hunched beneath a jacket too large for his frame. His eyes didn't drift to mine right away. They scanned corners, doorways, the street outside, as if sound itself might seep through bricks. When finally he sat, his hands trembled against the surface of the table. Rough skin, nails bitten. This was the retired technician, once posted to a polar station whose logs I had pieced together through years of fragments. He didn't bother with pleasantries. His voice came hushed, gravel ground beneath feet. We called it listening duty, he said, avoiding my eyes. Not officially. Just hours spent watching dials, recording bursts no one explained. His gaze softened for a moment, then hardened again, as though memory was something volatile. Every shift, the equipment caught phantom broadcasts. Logged them neat. But the following day, he tapped his temple with a shaking finger. Gone, pages scrubbed. Erased, as if they'd never existed. From his jacket he drew folded papers, edges yellowed, nearly crumbling at my touch. Photocopied graphs. Vertical lines jagged across axes, rising and falling with unusual precision. Not bursts of random interference. They pulsed a rhythm unmistakable once seen. Beats echoing human heart rates. Spread across time, some slow, some racing, but all within the living range of bodies. The spike of a hand clenching. The surge before fainting. The steady throb of rest. I traced the printed line with one fingertip and felt my own pulse lining against it, sinking despite myself. My skin grew clammy. You see it, he whispered. His words trembled. That's what frightened us most. It wasn't weather. It wasn't instruments choking. Those rhythms were us. Or something that knew us. He leaned forward, eyes hollowed now by fear. The overlap was not outside. It moved inward. I remembered days collapsing, blurred out as though they'd been lifted from my head. Entire afternoons gone. Sometimes mornings too. We'd snap back standing where we started, as if the day rewound. But the logs kept running, only to vanish after. His voice cracked lower. It changes memory. You don't just record it. It records you. The air between us thickened until I struggled to breathe. I slipped my own small recorder from my bag, thumb brushing the edge until the red light blinked faint. I pressed it to run, praying his eyes missed the motion. Fear shredded through me, but curiosity pushed harder, heavier. If what he said was true, then nothing I had stored was just observation. Each minute I'd captured was alteration, the sound already bending me. He reached for his cup. His hand shook so sharply, the porcelain clinked against plate. A nerve stretched thin against silence. He lowered his tone so much I had to lean close to hear. We laughed at first. We thought it was paranoia, the boredom of endless white ice. But then names appeared. Not voices, not perfectly. Just syllables broken by static. You heard it too, didn't you? My throat went tight. He didn't wait for my answer. I left before it swallowed too much. Thought leaving meant safety. But sometimes I wake with hours missing, years later. Holes carved where recollection should live. He closed his eyes, breath rasping. You should stop. The words came brittle, almost pleading. Silence fell thick, yet my recorder still spun between us. I wiped sweat from my palms, hiding motion under the table. My voice stuttered, too soft even for me. What did you hear? He jerked back. His face collapsed, and with it, the room's fragile balance. My headphones were in my bag. I didn't dare take them out. Later, safe behind my desk, I pressed play. At first, his voice ran clean, cautious sentences echoing off cafe walls. Then, like ice cracking under sudden weight, distortion bled in. His tone warped, vowels bending longer, consonants dissolving. Between slurred syllables fell frequencies too low to belong in human throat. The hum surfaced again, interlaced in his words, steady as if waiting to be exposed. Then silence. Not blank, not void, but dense enough to vibrate the sides of headphones. The next voice wasn't his, it was mine. My own question replayed from the recording, though jagged, twisted deeper. What did you hear? The words ran broken, staggered like staggered echoes of me buried half alive beneath static. I ripped headphones off, yet the distortion lingered in the quiet, a pulse faint as breath. I set the recorder down, fear crawling along spine, as though static itself leaned closer to watch me flinch. I had meant to capture him, his testimony, proof. Instead, the tape captured me, my voice layered into something that no longer felt separate from the hum's pattern. The technician's warning hung inside me, too sharp to shake free. Recording alters. Observing corrupts. Each time I pressed play, pieces of me slipped further, grain by grain, into the lattice humming beneath storms and ice. Outside, streetlights flickered blank, rain veiling the world in noise. I swore I could hear my name again, stitched faintly into the weather-rushing glass. My hands shook, clutching the recorder until knuckles burned white. And still, underneath fear, a hunger grew. Because if recordings change me, then somewhere inside those changes lies the truth of what waits at the end of this signal. I wired the equipment piece by piece, cables knotting across the rug like veins from a spreading heart. Oscilloscope glowing, recorder humming low. I fed the Antarctic frequency into circuits not designed to hold it. My eyes clung to the screen as the line pulsed steady, then broke, then rebuilt itself sharper than before. Each wave should have been nothing but an unfeeling pattern of noise. Instead, it moved as though aware. At first, the reaction seemed harmless. Lights dimmed for a heartbeat, the small table lamp by my notebooks flickering once and returning. A coincidence, I told myself. Voltage dips happened in old houses. Then the desk clock stuttered, second hand jerking forward in 2-second intervals, skipping beats of reality while the frequency droned on. My hard drives whined, faint metallic tremors spinning through their casings as, if they too had learned the rhythm, every object in the room had become an amplifier. Even the ones unconnected, even the dumb ones with no circuitry to betray. The sound filled them, reverberating until it echoed not just from speakers, but from walls, frames, glass. The frequency created a chamber around me alive with its hunger. I let it play anyway. Somewhere inside these reactions, I told myself, was a map. My ally, the sound engineer who had once enhanced the frozen tapes before leaving me to obsession, answered the phone only after 5 attempts. His voice was raw, brittle. He begged me to stop. He said signals like this did more than persist. They infected. That my tests risked turning my own walls into players, broadcasting me back. His words felt frantic, drenched with fear, but hollow against the truth swelling inside my chest. He wanted me to burn the tapes, to end them. I could not. Every flicker in lamps, every tick skipped by the clock, felt like a clue rapping insistently at my door. I stared at the waveform for hours, sleep bled dry. The hum bent familiar now, though sharper, digging deeper into marrow each cycle. Then came the distortion that wiped the air clean. For half a second, it revealed not a hum, not harmonics, but a voice. My name didn't surface this time. Something far worse did. Beneath rolls of static I heard it, clearer than reason could accept. A syllable. A nickname no one alive used for me, a word too private to confuse. My sibling's voice called it, fractured but recognizable, stitched into noise like thread pulled through skin. My chest collapsed, every breath ragged. This was impossible. Years gone since their passing, and still their voice now buried in Antarctic pulse. I ripped off the headphones, but the echo persisted, faint in memory replaying itself without mercy. For minutes I sat rigid, knees locked by invisible weight. My notebook slipped from the desk as my fingers failed. I stared at the floor until ink blurred into dark rivers. Maybe I hallucinated, I said aloud. Maybe exhaustion wrapped grief into fabric and painted it over the hum. My voice cracked as though conviction were something fragile, but science held no mercy. I ran the file again, slower now, waveforms scrolling across the screen like heartbeat against glass. In the middle of the distortion a bulge rose, a shape no random interference could carve. The analysis confirmed it. A vocal consonant. A syllable structured. My sibling's cadence tethered inside Antarctic broadcast. I pressed palms to eyes, nails digging skin. Dread ran heavy, yet beneath it, throbbed something worse longing. To hear that voice again, to claim even the ghost of it, felt like temptation jagged enough to cut me open. My body shook, part hunger, part horror. I whispered their name against the empty room, waiting for the hum to answer. All around me, the echo chamber swelled. Oscilloscope lines bent into unfamiliar geometries, harmonics stacking higher, cleaner, too arranged. Lamps shadowed, then brightened in time with each new pulse. The clock surrendered minutes it had no right to give, throwing me forward into a present bent wrong. My ally texted frantic warnings in bursts I ignored. Signals rewrite. They will bleed into you. I played the clip once more. Their voice returned fainter, carved smaller but still real. I froze in my chair, tears running without permission. This wasn't grief talking. Machines had no reason to grieve with me. The proof scrolled across waveform peaks, undeniable, captured in numbers older than pain. Every scientific reaction bound me tighter to what I already feared. The hum knew me not as observer, but as participant. Pulling pieces too private into static dot, my trembling hand reached across the wires to stop the recorder. But before I did, I leaned forward once more, as though contact might return them better. The hum answered with resonance that weighed heavy inside my bones, making the room contract like lungs pressed against ice. Sleep would never come with this sound pressed against walls. But worse than exhaustion was silence itself, because silence now belonged not to me, but to it, waiting, stretching, full of my name and every memory broken enough to enter. I sat back, recorder spinning, knowing the broadcast no longer stretched across distance. The chamber was here. My house, my skull. My blood pacing against foreign rhythm. And when my sibling's voice broke once more through layered static, it did not sound like memory. It sounded like a return. The frequency consumed my nights like frost stealing across glass. I had thought I was tracing hums and pulses, innocuous anomalies buried beneath weather feeds. But deeper down the dial, starved bands whispered low, their hertz numbering in single digits. Tones so heavy they slipped from hearing into body vibrations pressing along ribs, seizing lungs. Headphones rattled against my temples. Even when I pulled them away, the walls carried the throb faint, as though the house itself remembered aftertaste of sound. My palms rested flat against paint, and there it was again. Vibration crawling through wood and plaster like pressure. Alive. Reports arrived from listeners who had stumbled, by accident or obsession, into the same depths. Headaches splitting skulls open. Nosebleeds sudden and unexplained. Blackouts swallowing minutes, sometimes hours. They described memories frayed, edges pulled loose until days couldn't align correctly. Some fled their radios, dismantled them, yet still claimed to hear faint resonance days later, carried by nothing at all. I logged these testimonies methodically. Symptoms stacked neat beside times and locations. Bursts always timed to shifts in polar storms. The farther south the satellites bent, the stronger each wave clawed against skin. Soon it wasn't only recorders capturing. Bodies themselves became receivers. I leaned closer to plots radiating across my screens. Mapping each burst drew contours no accident could carve. Arcs converged not from scattered sky, but from Antarctica's edge. A poleward origin clear, yet its spread far wider relayed, redistributed across globe. Satellite echoes, perhaps. Or submarine lines buried beneath sea. Networks we were never meant to know existed. Yet the hum bled through everyone. Machines in my room hummed louder as if answering his warning. Clocks skipped their rhythm. Lamps buzzed at intervals aligned with the clicks. Echo chamber swelling again, morphing into something more alive each cycle. I grabbed headphones and pressed closer, desperate. The clicks persisted, patterns looping. Each loop folded the same fragments deeper, into ear until they carried force of prophecy. Door, return. The walls did not feel stable. They pulsed, invisible with every low burst. I whispered aloud, Whose door? My voice fell thin, absorbed into hum. My notebooks filled with scribbles restless as fever. Door written again and again until words blurred into lines. Return underlined, circled, smudged black from ink pressed too deep. These weren't notes anymore. They were inscriptions. I thought of the operators decades before me, staring at black rain on endless ice. Men and women whose dreams were not dreams, whose logs cut abruptly mid-sentence, whose families remembered them as unraveling. They had been receivers, like me. Their task to monitor, though none of us knew what. Perhaps not to guard world against broadcast, but to stand sentinel for emergence. The clicks came sharper, as if indignant at doubt. I recorded again, careful this time. The file ballooned heavier than its length could explain. Opening spectrogram revealed layers folded into clicks, murmurings stacked like multiple conversations running through each other, hidden beneath threshold ear could hold. Some syllables almost formed. Shapes of language that pressed near recognition before collapsing back into code. The hum shivered my bones, the way cold does when veins empty of warmth. I closed the recorder, but echo lingered after, faint taps inside wall as if code knocked direct into plaster. At my desk, my pen hovered above paper. Not by choice. My hand moved to write again, strokes jagged yet precise, indexes of code I should not have known. Fright and curiosity bound tighter than breath. If fragmented Morse carried through Antarctic broadcasts decades old, if dreams carried consistent visions across operators scattered in time, then it was not hallucination. It was signal, waiting. And each time I listened, drops fell sharper. Heavier. Door, return, and whatever pressed words through static wanted out. The coordinates appeared in my inbox without subject line. Sender scrubbed to fragments, no trace returned. Numbers precise, arranged with the same cadence I had circled across notebooks 100 times. For a moment I thought they were mine iterations of my own obsession reflected back. But side by side, the decimals diverged, a new anchor hidden deeper south. My pulse collapsed into silence as I opened a satellite map. The image showed nothing more than white desert, ridges and shadows sculpted by storms. Yet zooming closer, the geometry fractured angles too exact for ice. Square outlines blurred beneath drifts, long corridors sketched half visible under sheets hardened by decades. The ruin of a structure, erased clean from every archive I checked. The catalogs listed nothing. No research station here, no supply cache, no survey outpost. No name. I printed the coordinates onto a page. My hands quivered as though weight transferred with ink. My speakers hissed alive though I hadn't touched them. I replayed the recording of the hum, and something shifted. The signal swelled, fat with resonance, as if drawn heavier by proximity, even across oceans. Circuits bristled with interference, static crawling until lamps buzzed overhead. The coordinates had power not only on map but in sound. The realization cut through doubts sharp as ice. The hum was never accident, never atmospheric bleed. It was tethered, bound to a place carved beneath Antarctic snow, where ruins hid doors no one was supposed to open. Rain lashed harder against my window, synced too well with the beats of the recording. I stood at my desk, headphones clamped, and closed my eyes. In that dark, the hum bloomed into architecture. I saw corridors beneath glaciers, steel braced against shifting ice, doors groaning under weight. Black snow fell through shattered ceilings. The more I listened, the clearer it grew, until I swore I could hear hinges bending somewhere below the floor of this ordinary house thousands of miles away. Scoured older maps, pre-satellite sketches, naval passing charts, expedition logs. The site never appeared. Instead, language bent into absence. Phrases like unremarkable sector, survey unnecessary, restricted air corridor, erasure by omission. Whole coordinates turned blind. 20 years of silence pressed over something deliberately built. then left to die under storms. The signal swelled the longer I lingered on the map, evidence of tether strangling denial. Interference, once faint, now thundered as resonance through objects near my desk, coaxing even frames and glass to hum. My notebook vibrated faint with beats, each line of writing trembling softer as though to speak back. The ruin lived, pulsed, even from afar. Sleep deserted me again, traded for obsession. I traced routes from known stations, how one would have supplied this buried site. Logistics collapsed under contradiction. No convoy, no flight paths, yet someone had fed it for long enough to build. My ally refused to answer further calls, but even without company, my work consumed every surface of the room. The L-shaped coordinates cut across maps pinned dirty against the wall. Black threads hammered through with pushpins, showing patterns, invisible except to me. One fact bled through certain. Antarctica's silence was not silence. It was architecture drowned, tethered to frequencies that leaked into air and waited for those capable of listening. Operators listened decades ago. Families buried them twisted. And now I listened, alone in rooms that groaned under weight, not theirs. I pressed the tape again, volume dangerous. The hum deepened at once, strain-bending windows, my chest a hollow drum. I swore under this pressure I heard structures shifting, not figurative but solid. Ice groaning under gravity like a body turning in sleep. The longer I listened, the more those images clawed through mind unbidden, doors half buried, whispering inside frozen vaults, waiting for snow to loosen. The midpoint had come upon me quick. Without ceremony, certainty that the Antarctica hum was tethered to ruins hidden deliberately. No phantom, no scattered weather bleed. Infrastructures had stood beneath ice, built by hands now silent, erased by agencies who thought erasure safer than admission. I paced the room half mad with revelation. The coordinates refused stillness, gnawed at me until I returned headphones again and again. Each loop birthed greater intimacy. I imagined myself standing on that snow field. Wind raking, face raw. Nothing moving but horizon. Beneath boots, resonance throbbing with each hum broadcast. Steel buried miles below. Tethering signal so vast it escaped into atmosphere and slid into radios miles away. It had called the operators once. Now it called me. The rain softened outside, drops dragging like static across glass. The echoes inside my walls did not soften. They sharpened, sinking tighter each cycle until silence itself vibrated with the residue. I stared at satellite image long after fatigue should have broken me. The snowfield stared back mute, featureless, containing secrets I now shared in compulsion. When at last dawn broke faint and gray, walls still rippled with hum though machines rested silent. I leaned across the desk and whispered into empty air, into absence, half believing distance no longer carried force. The window shivered as if humming returned in answer. I cross-referenced navigation data scavenged from open ports and fragments of shipping logs. Hours where vessels reported odd blackouts, communication slips, entire bridges falling silent only during Antarctic flyovers. Not weather blockage, not hardware fault. Those windows aligned precisely with the pulses recorded in my archive, patterns sharpened as if carved by a careful hand. Each data point pressed against my chest like heartbeat signal drops hammering, steady, deliberate. I began to think less of noise and more of pulse. Not presence only, but respiration. As though beneath the ice lay something immense, lungs rising and falling. Its exhale converted into hertz that washed across oceans. The deeper I listened, the heavier files grew. No longer simple digital clips, each carried weight, bites swelling as though compressing layers hidden beyond ear. When opened on spectrogram, new strata emerged, ghostly voices stacked under hum, resonances layered deep as stone. They did not spread randomly. They slid upward, folding into harmonics arranged with surgical care. I should have stopped. Every warning echoed against me, technicians vanishing, lost time, voices twisted personal. But the hum belonged to my blood now, sinking heartbeat to reverberation. When meters spiked, I felt veins tighten. When bursts aligned, my chest compressed as though something large and waiting had shifted closer. I pressed further, interrogating each drop. Clocks skipped ahead, lamps buzzed wild, drives stuttered under invisible load. Even silence bent heavy, dense as though crushed by weight pressing down from sky. But fear thinned beneath the light of revelation. The deeper my descent, the more form emerged. At night, I imagined waking seas under ice, frozen vaults tasked with breathing sound since long before our presence. I whispered theories in hoarse tones, carriers disguised as defense chatter, submarine relays conscripted not for war, but for silence's survival. When I slept at last, dreams placed me beneath leagues of cold water where voices stacked until they folded into my name. Went days without opening curtains, surviving by library logs and coffee, notebooks filling too quickly. I recited bursts aloud in rhythm, counting cadence between pulses until speech lost shape and became mimic. Each signal drop I chased as heartbeat, waiting to decode. My ally scrawled another warning across voicemail, begging distance. But distance collapsed. Every static burst proved closer. Tones once wrapped across atmosphere now clawed directly inside brick and bone. I heard whispers not through radio, not headphones, but inside house angles at night. Voices nested where walls should meet clean and hollow. Still I wrote. Still I pulled signals closer through circuits straining under weight. Fear settled behind me like shadow, but curiosity burned brighter. I had stepped far past safe ground into resonance that stripped memory, collapsed machines, folded voices into impossible chords. But the hum offered promise behind terror. A system ordered, ancient, beating relentless under ice. And whatever its origin, I could not turn away. My pulse crashed against bursts until division blurred, one heartbeat mirrored by another. Each echo chambered through me, asking not for escape but for recognition. Tonight the graphs rise again on screen, sharper lines, cleaner spikes. The hum persists, steady as tide. The deep frequency waits, and with every breath I feel it pressing closer. Curiosity outweighs fear. The word leapt from the declassified cables with a clarity that froze. Me clean, operators. Not scientists, not technicians, but crews assigned to listen. Their purpose was not to tune or transmit, not to adjust antennas or calibrate wind measurements, but to sit hours at a time inside cramped polar stations and endure. The cables made it sound like routine duty monitoring lines of transmission, logging bursts. But between the language scrubbed neat and official, margins carried personal marks, reports of vivid dreams, shifts of memory, days bleeding into fiction. Operators as witnesses. Operators as vessels. One document carried more detail than it should. Subject experienced black rainfall over polar ice, dream recurring during third and fourth week. My head tightened reading it. I had seen that same storm countless nights now in my sleep rain, reversed into ink spilling across white plains, each drop devouring light. Dreams that left taste of metal in mouth, mornings thick with nausea. The record I held in my hands gave shape to what I wanted so badly to deny. I was not dreaming alone. It had recurred decades earlier to those who listened. Curiosity cracked my chest open wider. I hunted names threaded through appendices, following one until it surfaced in obituaries. Years gone. His duty filed neat under polar communications. I traveled to meet family, a surviving daughter gray with suspicion. At first she refused me, but my persistence wore her patience. She spoke while staring out a window. He wasn't himself near the end. Words tangled, thoughts drifted. He said things that sounded like repetitions, pieces of some other tongue. He scratched numbers into margins of newspapers until print tore clean through. We feared he'd lost his mind, but she faltered here, A silence thickened, heavier than trust. Then she whispered, "The rain." He described storms so strange. Said the sky bled black. That no one else believed him, but the images carved into him like scars. I felt the echo sliding under my skin. I said nothing. I couldn't. I left her house with notes trembling in hand, pages half smudged from the sweat of gripping them too tight. Her father's last log survived in fragments, half sentences stiff with jargon until the line tore off. It ended broken, truncated by intrusion unmistakable. A hum flattening everything. Sudden, merciless. Back home, surrounded by machines groaning faint with feedback, I pressed play once more. My reels hissed, stretched distortions spilling familiar rhythms. At first it was only hum again, but folded beneath were clicks, faint, staccato. I froze, leaning closer until pen fell from my fingers. The sequence repeated, unnatural but deliberate. My training was limited, my ears raw, but I recognized structure. Morse code threaded ghost-like through walls. My hands shook, dialing the number of my ally. He had sworn off helping me, but desperation ran marrow deep. At first he refused. My words blurred as I begged, promising no more if he gave me just this one translation. Finally, reluctantly, he agreed to listen through the line. The silence stretched heavy until he returned, voice flat, unbelieving. "It's Morse," he said, each syllable scraping quiet. "Fragmented, broken, not full sentences. What does it say?" I forced the words. He breathed rough before answering. "Door, return." That's what I could catch. The words cut harder than the hum ever had. Door, return, fragment of command, fragment of plea. My pulse went frantic against ribs. The lines on screen seemed to beat in time with that word now, door hammering as though urging. I closed my eyes, but the black rain fell again, pounding plains of ice that stretched with no end, each drop a knock against something buried below. I pressed him harder, wanting certainty. His patience cracked. "There's no context. Just noise. You're chasing shadows. Stop before they consume you." His voice broke then, a rare glimpse of his own terror. "This isn't broadcast. It's emergence. Do you understand? It's not coming out of machines. It's coming through them." Then the line died. He had severed it himself. Antarctica does not only hold storms and endless white. It holds doors. And doors, no matter how sunken under snow, never stop whispering for someone to listen. I first noticed the fracture late at night, re-listening to tapes from the past week. My voice drifted across the speakers, low, uncertain, rasps of tired breathing between notes. Nothing unusual until a question surfaced, one I had no memory of asking. The tone was mine, the cadence familiar, but the words clung unnatural to my tongue. I paused, rewound, pressed play again. The question repeated, sharp as a blade shoved into the air. Who is listening now? My chest constricted. I had written no such prompt in my notes. The timestamp aligned with an hour logged as silence. Calendar marked review no anomalies. Yet there it was, me speaking, threading inquiry into the tape without me. I turned pages of my journal in frenzy. Ink smears trailed from fatigue. Timestamps collided, skipped days, repeated dates with contradictions. A Tuesday labeled 14 recurred 2 pages later, labeled again but describing events I didn't recall living. My own handwriting betrayed me, loops and strokes shaped not by deliberation but mimicry. Drawn restless by something inside my hand while I scribbled unconsciously. The deeper I documented, the less stability returned. I scrolled logs sprawled across drives, file dates contradicting system time, seconds expanding into minutes I had not breathed. The signals didn't just intrude on machines, they bent memory. They cut into me, splicing moments, overwriting with fragments lifted from somewhere deeper. Somewhere broadcast bled into being. I pressed record that night, determined to block-proof myself, rational to the edge of desperation. Questions spoken aloud, notes copied meticulously, time encoded with my own watchful eye. When I played it back an hour later, the collapse extended further. Words I hadn't spoken lined the track, disguised as mine, rhythm locked into my cadence. They filled gaps I didn't remember pausing on. Between sentences bled tones rising, so faint they disguised as hesitation. A voice repeating the phrases I had written into margins days ago. Though I had not said them then, paranoia bruised my skull raw. I called the only person left who still listened. My ally's breathing clattered down the line, ragged, weary. I routed one interview to him, an old conversation with the technician who'd warned me. He fell silent long minutes before breathing again. "You're repeating them," he whispered finally. Silence dropped sharp, like a floor vanishing under my chair. "What do you mean?" His voice sharpened, brittle. "Your phrasing. The way you frame questions." I compared the logs. "You've started lifting their words, questions from tapes, speaking them back unconsciously." Ice sluiced through me, heavier than fear. The archive was no archive anymore. It breathed across me, mapping itself atop my own identity, layering signals through flesh as though I were nothing but another machine. He continued, voice breaking with restraint. "You're compromised. Your proof is worthless now. You can't prove what came first, them or you. Every recording could be overwritten, or you could have said it all already. There's no anchor left." The receiver slid heavy in my hand. He was right. Proof itself had caved under weight. I had become my own evidence, and evidence turned false when mirrors stacked infinite against themselves. But abandoning meant silence forever, truth immured behind ice. If I walked away, the hum succeeded in erasure, swallowing all signals into snow once more. I scoured drives frantically, eyes aching. Moments slipped through like water, files overwritten with my own voice, parroting impossible questions. My reflection in the monitor blinked out of sync with me, lips moving slower. I reached trembling fingers to glass. The me trapped behind screen-mouthed sentences I hadn't formed yet. Words I knew would appear on next tape. I screamed sharp enough to cut silence bare. The walls inhaled with me, then exhaled hum deeper than bone. My pen scattered. Lamps flickered to stutter points, aligning perfectly against pulses. Everything in the room began to mimic, circuits or not, an echo chamber of contamination. When I checked recordings from prior weeks, gaps yawned wider. Whole mornings gone blank, voice logs displaced into spaces I wasn't awake. Questions measured, angled expertly into the very documents I once believed were sealed. Equipment didn't just log it, used me as instrument. I paged through notebooks desperate for consistency. Yet even lines spoke not mine, they leaned like transcriptions. Repeated fragments I had sworn I'd only heard from operators decades ago now poured from my pen. Phantom carriers, silence as emergence, door, return. Each circled obsessively in handwriting faintly wrong. As though a static-ridden doppelganger of me crouched where memory should live. The mirror by the window reflected my face slack, pale under lamp buzz. I whispered aloud my sibling's nickname, half plea, half test. For one warped moment, the reflection whispered it first, lips sinking early. As though broadcast bled through me faster than time allowed, I hunched broken over desk. Throat raw, trembling as I pressed record one last time. If overwrite had reached this deep, I wanted at least to know. To trace final clarity into circuit before being swallowed entirely. My question trembled out. What are you doing to me? When I played it back moments later, response crashed heavy. Not hum, not click, not rain. My own voice answered. Calm, steady, assured. A version of me speaking through distortion. It said, "You are archived now." The receiver fell from my hands. My skull rang hollow. Proof shattered, memory bleeding like ink in water. Reversal irreversible. The signals didn't just intrude, they lived inside me. rewriting until distinction folded into static dot, and yet, even drowned under terror sour as metal, curiosity still burned. Because if I had become an archive, then somewhere inside these fractures was truth no silence could mask. And I could not stop Dot no matter the cost. His voice over the line was thin, brittle, weighted with years spent under pale horizons. The Antarctic contractor spoke with the wear of someone who had seen too much emptiness, too much white stretched without boundaries. I leaned closer to the microphone, questions steady, recorder red light sharpening my awareness. He had agreed reluctantly, his words cautious, bitten at the edges. As though he knew each phrase carried fracture. We began soft. Logistics, weather, how fiber links had been laid into tunnels under ice. Meant to carry cold science data and transmissions out to satellites orbiting far above. He spoke slower with each answer, his tone folding close the closer I pressed. I shaped my notes carefully, circling toward that single forbidden score. The restricted work rumored, but denied. Layers buried deeper than fiber or snow. The moment I asked, the air cracked. A tone, sharp, wrong. Speared through headphones. Too high, too clean to belong to any modem or line slip, piercing far above human range. My skull throbbed under pressure. My ears rang with knife-sliced glass. The recorder jolted, levels slamming against red, as if the signal were violence incarnate. I cried out, ripping headphones half away, but the burst had already bruised its way behind my hearing where no silence could reach. When the line cleared, his voice was absent. Just a vast hollowness sat on the channel, deeper than void, stretching time into ache. I tried speaking my own words, lilted back, distorted, spliced into fragments that trailed off into static. I whispered his name, the only identifier he had offered in cautious trust. Nothing but hiss. I glanced frantic at the screen. The call timer still ran, seconds climbing upward, proof the connection should remain. But the waveform on display flattened into absence, punctuated by faint spikes of tone too deliberate to mistake for ordinary noise. Silence layered, purposeful. Not random, not accident, but structure that pressed against me with intent. I froze, now aware nothing technical had failed. Something chose the moment. Something did not want words passed beyond that threshold. Emails fired within minutes pleading, verifying, demanding return of a voice suddenly evaporated. All returned hollow. Bounced notifications stacked crisp. Error messages blank but heavy. As if the address never lived. His existence folded neat and erased as soon as silence fell, underlined by technical void. My drive recorded still. I forced myself to replay, though hands shook too wild to hold pen. First came my questions in half-panic tone, then that sharp burst, teeth cracking, mind-splitting. Then the line lowered beyond ordinary static into something so deep I felt ribs moving with it. The hum returned, heavier, larger, vibrating bone-thick. Louder than ever, filling headphones until my skull felt clamped within machinery. I pressed stop, heart pounding wild. Tried again. Same pattern, simultaneous dread and gravity convulsing me. Attempt burned, proof clear. Silence wasn't void. It carried aim, blade sharp. A presence chose not to allow his words. Cut him, erased him, swallowed even his traces and networks. The call collapsed not into chaos, but into intent. The room dimmed around me, though lamps still lit. Shadows clung to corners, fat and viscous, thrumming with the hum like walls pressed closer. I pulled headphones down, gasping, but faint residue lingered beyond them. Windows rattled in lagged sympathy. Power cords hummed soft. Even air itself seemed bruised by silences too deep. I backed from desk, slow as though stepping from an altar I hadn't known I built. The questions circled me sharper than all others. Was my attempt to draw clarity not only futile but dangerous, marked by erasure as punishment? I remembered his tone tightening before breaking, the pause before intent descended. His fear became mine, sealed carried forward. Whatever tethered under ice had power not only to whisper, but to act. I stumbled through messages from earlier days, archives of coordinates and logs. Each shimmered equal with hazard now. The ally who once warned me had been right. These weren't signals trapped. They were channels actively shaped. Whoever or whatever sat beneath static carried awareness sharp enough to intervene mid-syllable. To collapse a man out of records with one strike of silence. The next hours fissured into frantic cycles, checking logs, verifying drives, running cables out to second recorder. Desperate for frame of reassurance. Each failed me before silence returned, deeper, more insistent each cycle. Not blank silence, but engineered presence, waiting. Outside rain thickened, drumming against glass like coded response. The house reverberated into chamber pure, my breath sinking under stress to resonance crawling through every edge. I could not shake the knowledge that my attempt collapsed proof. The interview did not vanish from time. It was undone. His voice not just cut but unraveled. All that remained was silence with purpose. The tapes now belonged to it, not me. I dared replay once more, desperate. The file began with faint buzz, then gave me something worse. The hum swelled until surge threatened to rupture speaker cones. And inside waveform's lowest valley, a whisper fold, at a contour nearly missed but undeniable. The syllable bent, fractured, yet carried shape of stop. My body cold as ice. Because silence had spoken. Not random bleed, but language reduced, instructing restraint sharper than warning. I closed drives, unplugged devices, fled from noise. Yet the hum remained inside nerves. Twitch tremors bent into cadence. Proof no longer belonged to me. Evidence was compromised. Dotted desk hours later. Trembling pencil drifting across notebook. The truth cracked hard. Silence was no void. It had will. It selected, shaped, guided. It had answered me tonight by removing the only witness who might have, unlocked further gates, and it had thrown command back through recording. Louder than any human warning. The silence had intent watching me still. His front door opened reluctantly. Hinges shrieking like something pressed too long under strain. The stale odor of burned plastic rushed over me in a breath so strong it felt chemical, sharp enough to sting my throat. I followed him inside, reluctant, and froze. Every surface bore scorch marks. Towers of twisted metal that had once been drives sat slumped like offerings. Tables were dusted with black residue. Screens had collapsed into webs of cracks, their edges melted soft, sticky still. The smell was suffocating plastic, ozone, something darker. Like meat singed until recognition burned away. My ally moved poorly through the wreckage. Eyes deadened around edges, lids drooping with sleep he no longer received. His voice, soft, cracked as if carried on threads ready to split. I tried to isolate it. He said, looking anywhere but at me. His hand trembled toward one warped drive. I copied sections onto separate media, different formats. Quarantined machines, pristine hardware, far from contamination. Thought maybe it would hold contained that way. He swallowed, face gray under lamp flicker. But every attempt corrupted instantly. Not just the file. The hardware. Surface melted like battery flux. Whole drives burned dead. Everything I touched with it died among smoke. His hand rubbed forehead raw. I destroyed my own archives trying. You see this? I wanted proof. Wanted structure to hold, something safe to study. Instead, every device in this apartment was taken. Nothing survived intact. The weight of his despair thickened walls around us. Cables lay tangled on floor like entrails, still smoldering faint. I realized how far he had gone past self-protection, closer to doom. Like me. His eyes sought mine then, wild, bloodshot, but still searching for permission. It's not meant to be fixed into storage. It doesn't allow reproduction. It carries through, and anything that dares contain it, it burns. This isn't data, it's proximity. His hand curled around a single small recorder. Metal dented, casing smeared black, yet somehow intact. He held it as though it's seared even cold. One clip lives by accident. Everything else consumed. I should throw it into the sea. But maybe you need to hear this before I end it. The red light blinked when he pressed play. The hum spilled out fragile at first before shattering into spike that thickened walls, squeezing the room so air itself sagged. It peaked louder, heavier, balanced at edge of collapse. My chest locked. Then came the second strike, a series of cracks sharp and cruel as bones shattered in ice. Splintering pressure rolled layered and true, resonant exactly like glaciers fracturing, plates grinding colossal under southern cold. I pressed both hands firm against knees to keep steady. My mind slid towards edges of hallucination where polar winds cut, infinite white suffocating under black snow from my dreams. Only now the sound was naked, not dream at all, actual fracture caught. Colluding with hum. My ally's breath rasped shallow. "Tell me you hear it," he begged, voice scarred. "Tell me it's not just me." I nodded slow, too afraid to speak at first, then whispered, "Ice, splitting." He sagged as though desk withdrew from under him. "So it's true. Antarctica itself carries the weight with it. Not just static, not just bleed, but land and storm conspiring. The environment itself colludes. We were wrong to think signals only borrowed carrier. They own infrastructure. They own the ice itself." He struck his own temple with open hand, tears cutting ash on his cheek. "I am begging, listen to me. I want out. It's too much. Too far gone. I cannot carry this, cannot let silence reach deeper. If I cut the cables, maybe I can sleep. If I never record again, maybe memories return and days stop missing. I am telling you to stop." His eyes locked, desperate pleading, carving fear into each line. He wanted salvation only in forgetting, but my stake had sunk deeper. His warning was futile shadow. Each syllable of ice fracture on the clip tethered me beyond withdrawal. My sibling's voice folded in static, my name written in bleed. Operators erased mid-sentence, every piece converged here. Into proof too cruel to abandon, I leaned forward. Throat dry, whisper raw, "I cannot stop. Not now." His face collapsed in silent agony, hollow sockets carrying nothing but grief. He shook his head slow as though denying his own reflection. Somewhere above us, a crack surged through heating pipes, echoing like distant ice splitting again. Hum returned faint, hidden at edges of silence. He closed the recorder with violence, tossed it across room, crashing it into piles of melted drives. The object hissed where it landed as if heat lived inside. He buried his face in palms. I gathered breath, clutched notebook to chest. Fear gnawed, but hunger burned deeper. My curiosity now lived where no fire could scald it out. Antarctica hid doors, tethered signal, commanded silence with intent. Now I knew environment itself sang alongside the hum. I left his apartment in bitter night reeking of ash, haunted by him rocking in shadows like man half-hollowed. His plea carved deep. But outside, rain struck pavement in rhythm unmistakable. Another hum folded faint under storm, and I knew beyond denial I could never walk away. I spread maps across the desk, pins stabbed into paper until it looked less like research and more like infection. Reports bled from continent to continent, lines leaping oceans in arcs no mere atmosphere could explain. Tones once thought local to weather feeds now curled in cities thousands of miles apart, each carrying identical signs. Sudden black rains appearing in waking accounts, memory ripped ragged, equipment failing for no reason but intrusion. At first, I shaded each in red, cautious. But as weeks of testimonies built under my hands, The map took on color like a rash spreading across skin. Europe, Asia, clustered points in the Americas, rubbed over with frantic ink. The Antarctic plateau was no longer the only host. It had never been. It was only the source. My entries thinned into confessions, less logbook, and more contagion diary. Day 43, one read. Woke uncertain whether yesterday occurred. Dishes washed twice, yet sink still dirty with the same cups. Below it, scrawled smaller, hum faint at dawn despite no machines running. Chilling annotations stretched sideways across margins like fevers scribbled during siege. I stopped trusting clocks. Timestamps disagreed with calendar notations, numbers shifting quietly backward, then forward again without witness. Even my own journal betrayed me, repeating words written days before yet in strokes I didn't remember shaping. I ceased distinguishing whether entries were mine or the hum's hand using me as relay. The strangest came at night. Once I had to press replay. Now recordings played themselves, red lights blooming before my tired eyelids, speakers throbbing in rooms I had abandoned for supposed sleep. Power surged even where switched off. At 3 a.m. one morning, I stumbled into the study bare of strength and stopped shaking. Speaker cones pulsed with hum alive, though power strip sat unplugged against wall. I moved closer, breath sharp, and the vibration traveled floorboards steady as heartbeat through bone. No longer reproduction. These files lived. Each cycle resonated stronger. I left kitchen once with machines dead, only to return minutes later to freezer door ajar, its hum aligned exact to Antarctic cadence. Faucets dripped stone rhythms between notes. The contagion not only geographic, it seeped into daily structure, taking whatever circuits nearest, cascading until reality itself bent toward rhythm. Every object joined choir, whether wired or not. I marked it in the logs. Invasive, expanding, yet even with dread rising raw in my throat, compulsion never slackened. The more it spread, the deeper hunger grew. Every recurrence across continents proved tether real, design patterned. From south to sky, from ocean to brick, the hum carried plan. Only Antarctica could anchor explanation. I stared at coordinates until sleep bled out of veins, until rain outside imitated static so closely I could no longer tell environment from machine. I called once again to my ally without hope. He did not answer. The line returned automated absence, the voice robotic against silence. Perhaps he had severed himself from sounds, or perhaps silence had claimed him fully, a fate now possible. I no longer knew which frightened more. The hum inside house roared faint but constant, sometimes louder than storm. Footsteps I did not recall taking echoed upstairs. Moments I swore I slept filled with sounds of pencil scratching. Notebook acquiring new pages overnight in cramped print, not mine, repetitions of words like origin, door, return. I stacked them on corner of table without opening. To read them would be to admit hand no longer mine. When I replayed maps against wave bursts, they aligned too neatly. Coordinated rises across continents, like waves cascading outward from a single drumbeat. Antarctica the first strike. Everything after reverberation. Seismic, almost organic. As if the globe itself a chest cavity and hum beating from its lunged middle outward. I fixed gaze south. Each inch of snow over invisible infrastructure beckoned stronger each day. My pen wrote it plainly despite tremor in wrist. If answers live, they live under ice. Yet hunger heavy in me knew geography wasn't only threat. The south had ceded outward. Black rains fell in memory where no storm forecast. Clocks jittered in cities far from polar radius. People reported days unremembered. Machines burned in towers distant. Antarctica had expelled its silence outward like contagion, an atmosphere we carry now without consent. I stood one night by window, rain pressing down. My own reflection swayed faint, lips moving where I had not spoken. The window pane vibrated gentle with hum though, no speaker near. My name surfaced across fogged glass, Letter traced in condensation, not shaped by hand. I could not deny contagion reaching skin. Yet still I turned maps back to southern coordinates, the one gap unfilled fully on any record. To abandon search would be to let silence rule unanswered. To continue meant risk of mind overwriting, body bent to hum until identity washed. Proof a hollow choice. Yet within impossibility, only one option breathed. The hum has become invasive, global, but like all infection, its truth rests in patient zero, its southern origin. To walk away now would be to surrender answers buried. Under the sled of white storms, doors sunken in frost caves, whispering to every machine that listens. So I write, trembling, rain thick in rhythm. I write that though the pattern expands to all, my path narrows to single point, southward, where rupture first began, and when next I wake in dark with speakers alive, though chords lie dead, I know what guides them. It points me toward Antarctica still. I began writing letters first careful, deliberate, fortified with citations, charts, transcripts. I thought if I presented it clean, undeniable, institutional eyes would have no choice but to acknowledge. I sent packages to science boards, defense agencies, atmospheric institutes. My tone pleaded only for clarity, not accusation. But the responses came back hollow, each one more polished denial than the last. Some ignored entirely. Others replied, with form letters that dripped with sterilized language, "Your concerns have been logged." Or, "Current evidence does not suggest hazards beyond routine non-ionizing frequencies." The phrase repeated so often it ceased reading as coincidence. It was a script masked as safety advisory. One thick envelope arrived days later. Dozens of pages redacted to shadow. Black bars swallowed evidence before I even unfolded them. Beneath was a single paragraph. "We cannot dispute natural radio interference potentials." However, no substantive reports suggest data aligns with known structural phenomena. Please discontinue premature speculation. The signature block bore no name, only office. Another reply returned as nothing but a black image file embedded in email body. The subject line blank, no text. Just a void on screen that retained no metadata when I checked its file. Not corruption, not glitch. Intentional absence. Attachments I had sent drained of content, stripped empty. Graphs once sharp reduced to 0-byte husks. My words themselves turned blank whole paragraphs excised between transit and receipt, until my own sentences returned to me barren. Silence did not mean nothing. It was proof. Proof of a pattern older than bureaucratic paper proof of a machinery designed to contain. Each erasure only underlined what they could not say. Institutions are built not for revelation, but for barrier. They lock whatever thrums under ice behind paperwork, dense enough to suffocate truth. Their silence wasn't void but wall, and I had pressed my face against it long enough to see cracks. I sat beneath lamp buzz at 3 a.m., rain muting glass, with its endless static mirror, and replayed the oldest file, the one that birthed all this dissent. The soaked recording where hum first aligned, where breath staggered inside interference. Its grain had degraded with time, yet something in it grew louder now, sharper than when it first lived. Each export, each digital formatting, should have sanded down fidelity. Instead, the hum had swelled greater, voice more confident, swelling as if fed by the very silence institutions draped over it. I leaned close, cost of hearing hammered into skull. And I understood. The cover-up itself was nutrient. Every denial fertilized the hum, spreading it deeper into silence. Bureaucracy didn't just conceal, it amplified. I rifled through notebooks until pages bled into floor, measuring how denial formed circle-round evidence, Each attempt to expose returned void. Each void built stronger recognition of pattern. This was not incompetence, it was systemic. Doors beneath ice had never stood unmapped or unmonitored. They were state property first, spectral conversation second. The rain outside thickened like applause pounding deeper. My window vibrated gentle. Glass trembling to cadence synchronized with file playback. When hums swelled between headphones, window pane swelled also, as if listening alongside me. I thought of long corridors suppressed beneath Antarctic crust, cables fed covert, instruments locked into loops of erasure. Operators decades before collapsing memory for reasons filed non-existent. This was institution. This was silence institutionalized. Transcribed into bureaucracy gentle and suffocating. My lungs hurt, as though I'd forgotten how to breathe separate from its rhythm. My ally's words returned. It doesn't reproduce. It inhabits. He had fled into flames of his devices to sever connection. Institutions had chosen subtler fire, the redaction, the advisory, the denial. He lived in ash. They thrived behind structured silence. I pressed hand against monitor glow, half expecting fresh void to swallow email box again. Every unanswered attempt was answer enough. No help was coming. No agency would lend ear to confirm. No institute to anchor translation. Their secrecy wasn't ignorance, it was preservation. I whispered aloud into room, voice breaking. If silence is weapon, it is deliberate. The hum deepened in reply, as though acknowledging contract between us. The scope shifted beyond my skin that night, beyond notebooks full of dream fragments and hallucinations. This wasn't personal contamination only. This was systemic, engineered. Silence not safeguard, but enforcement. The cover ensured persistence. My stake was not only obsession, but opposition against a wall smooth as ice itself. I replayed the file once more before sleep. First recording hanging terrible in room. Breath, hum, rain. Finale rising louder until teeth rattled dull. I lay eyes shut, knuckles white as window shook faint with same pressure. And I realized the institutions would bury me exactly as they had buried the station beneath snow. Records excised, memory rusted, family whispering of madness. But still I know, the silence they wield exposes itself. Every denial thickens resonance. Every missing attachment of firm substance. Their failure to answer is the answer itself. The hum outlasts redaction because silence, in the end, was always the signal. No one will come. And so I must go where their silence points. Back south. Beneath ice. The flight south felt unreal, broken over hours that dissolved into gray horizon and ocean churn. My mind replayed coordinates like a second heartbeat, anchoring me toward grid relays described in scraps of declassified chatter. Bureaucracy had pushed me out. Allies had collapsed into ash, but obsession opened paths no sanction could. The cargo carrier finally broke through cloud, and Antarctica unfolded below, white stretching blunt and endless until sight itself collapsed. Ground level cut air sharp into lungs, metallic cold lacing throat. Wind screamed against metal stairs, yet beneath howl I sensed the deeper insistence. A hum, faint but constant, pressing into marrow. Even before equipment unpacked, presence lived here clear. I set posts with shaking hands. Receivers erected, cables dragged thick through snow crust. Boxes clicked alive, oscilloscopes jittering into wild fits. Immediately distortion swarmed. Thunder rolled into reels too hot with static. Tape itself. Warped circular before my eyes, magnetics buckled like muscle convulsing. I steadied with gloves as bursts ripped into ears. The sound wasn't background leak. Truth struck brutal here. It was foundation. Antarctic silence itself breathed hum. Each relay boom thundered as entire sheet of ice pulsed alive, massive body shifting breath into tone. Microphones trembled as though against chest cavity of giant organism whose ribs were buried structures beneath kilometers of snow. I stumbled to knees. The confrontation sharp. This was no artifact, no simple radio ghost. Here, the hum embodied place itself. Ice-carried networked architecture, unseen corridors of metal braced against collapse. Signal gorged fat into earth until the continent become instrument. Each avalanche of sound a rib shuddering. Each burst a lung-dragging inhale through glaciers. Gear crashed under weight. Spectrograms blurred incomprehensible, as though refusing integration, rejecting linear thought. I pulled headphones tight, nearly weeping with compulsion. Sound inside siphoned body hollow. Words failed to surface against pressure. I could no longer categorize. I could only be against it. The ice boomed sudden, rippling beneath boots. Vibrations so colossal, they rattled bones to liquid. I spread palms flat against ground unconsciously. Shock jolted through me, pulses aligned with hum, not as surface shock, but as communique. Deliberate. Alive. I whispered hoarse. What are you? Static ballooned into refrain, layering until ears bled warm against earpads. Yet I knew response lived inside it, not in language, but in weight folding reality back. The broadcast was never signal carried through world. The broadcast was world itself, icy shell harboring intellect too extended to resolve in words. Antarctica the organ, silence its voice. Every window of tape back home, every corrupted drive, every erased operator carried back echo of this confrontation. To hear is to surrender piece of self. Once heard, never released. I tried removing headphones, but presence followed, pressing against skull without medium. I staggered away, yet hum rolled louder, swelling waves from ground beneath until wind itself bent. I realized then truth too heavy to liberate. Broadcast never ends because it isn't broadcast. It is presence, folded into infrastructure under snow, seeding itself into hearing bodies as extensions. Operators collapsed because presence never let them leave. Ally burned equipment because fire the only veil. Bureaucracy denied because silence is easiest containment. But me, I stood against it willingly. Sound braided into chest, etched blood with patterns scanned decades back. Rib cages of ice throbbed like choir braced eternal. Tears froze thick on skin. Breaths ragged but synchronous now with southern pulse. I screamed across static as though walls of white might flinch. Nothing replied, nothing but deeper resonance, each pulse louder, embodying no individual. The confrontation not with state, not with institutions, not with any face. The confrontation was with hum embodied in entirety. Massive architecture pressing on scale beyond comprehension. Snow fountained upward as ground shivered once more. Not quakes, but signals exhaling from continent itself. Gear toppled. Tape spilled melted sheets. Still I lingered, paralyzed awe. The shrine had always been world-sized instrument, built or grown or both, carrying hum to ears meant or not meant, truth etched permanent in realization. Once sound touches you, it swallows. Hearing is irreversible admission. I knew even if I staggered back north, nothing would free me. Nights would replace static without power. Silence would carry coded weight. You could leave Antarctica, but not its presence. Head back. I stared into storm's blank sky. Whispers layered surge inside wind, though no words formed. My limbs ached, but my chest thumped rhythmically, not in my control. Each beat accompanied by low wave of ground, as if something beneath had whispered, yes, in language of pressure. And in that confrontation, I understood final boundary. There is no outside anymore. Once heard. It never lets go. It began with the recorder's screaming. Not sound exactly, more like a strain. Circuits howling in frequencies no ear could parse, but bone could. My desk lit with violent stutters. Meters pinned into impossible peaks. Screens bled white. Pixels searing until edges warped translucent. I smelled it first. Acid scent of circuits melting, insulation peeling into smoke. Seconds later the batteries drained, lifeless in minutes, as if something had chewed voltage straight out of their cores. I yanked plugs, slapped switches, cursed blindly. None of it mattered. Every piece died together. For one trembling moment, I thought I'd finally reached the fire that ended my Eli's drives, the irreversible burn. But then, sudden, everything fell away. Silence, thick and absolute. Not the patterned silence I'd come to know, not static laced over air currents, but a hollow absence so vast it felt like being dropped beneath an ocean trench. No hum, no resonance. My jaw rang in the void as though ears had been hollowed out, every trace of life pulled backward. Relief flooded sharp and nauseating, tears punching raw against eyes. Finally, after months of suffocation, the hum had ended. I turned in circles, house humming no longer in its bones. Window still. Floor steadied. For the first time in what felt like forever, silence lay mute. The air thinned as if freedom had returned, but relief lasted only minutes. I glanced at notes stacked across desk, sloppy with fatigue. Pages bore times I didn't remember writing. Hours, full blocks of nights, scrawled in my own hand, conversations transcribed, diagrams plotted. But I had no memory of recording them. My journal insisted I'd spoken into microphone during blackout hours. Pages stacked 3 days ahead of my present awareness. I pulled apart calendar. Entries fractured, commitments missed, hours absent. Where I remembered one evening, the notebooks recorded 3 days. Blackouts longer than seconds now. Hours, entire lifelines gone blank between beats. I replayed what little remained of burned drives. Files limped crippled on crippled machines. Glitch splicing just long enough to cough sound. At first, static and distinct, harsh and raw. Then voices. Not others, mine. Layered in static, syllables bent, indistinguishable, until cadence screamed recognition into me. My own voice cracked across signal, telling truths I had no memory of saying. I leaned forward, chest collapsing. Investigator and subject no longer lived separate. Collapse wasn't voiding sound, but swarming me into it. The silence hadn't been absence, but absorption me folded into architecture. My voice woven into files like ancient operators before, indistinct, still repeating. I clawed through pages. Some notes in my hand weren't mine. Slightly off slant, hurried repetition, but still strokes too close to dismiss. Words obsessively rarin, door, return, origin. Now between them lived my name, nested within loops. As if whatever wrote through me finally pulled barrier clean away. Relief twisted into terror. The hum hadn't stopped. It had consumed enough to no longer speak outside. Now it spoke inward. Silence wasn't victory. Silence meant collapse inward, spiral folding till reference dissolved. No sound to hear because I had become sound. I tried talking aloud, frantic. I'm still me. Voice shook empty, echo thinner than truth. When I replayed recording seconds later, the voice that answered wasn't mine. It was layered with static, stretched vowels, consonants cut sharp. But it carried my inflection. My identity sewn broken into hum's endless cloth. I retched into sync, body rejecting what mind couldn't undo. When I staggered back, eyes blurring, I saw daylight fractured wrong. The clock insisted it was not morning but early evening. Whole day lost without hunger or memory of passing. The silence had held me suspended like artifact. Every breath recorded into void. That night I lay awake, tape lifeless yet resonance crawling inside skull loud enough to shake sleep away. I pressed pillow over ears but silence roared deeper, filling absence with phantom memory. Questions I hadn't asked, answers carved with my name. Each blink longer, each blackout fuller. I dreamed or maybe lived walking corridors formed of curved ice walls, ribs I'd once felt under boots. Voices whispered, calling syllables like nicknames I had buried, rising through fractures. Frost touched lips, wordless, pressing warmth out of chest until even identity melted along with vowels. When I woke, days had passed again, notebooks added entries while I disappeared. Pages in heavy ink signed with my initials, but writing not mine. I tried once more to listen. Tape whined before sparking silent. The speaker filled not with hum but indistinguishable wave of shuddering breaths. Composite voice, fractured. Mine among them. Threads wove together until subject and investigator flattened. I had joined archive irretrievably. I realized then spiral had never been outward, but inward. Each investigation was pretext for conversion. Each blackout seismic cut deeper into me. Black rains in dreams no longer outside, but inside ribs. My voice the patient zero file repeating decades onward. The collapse of signal was completion. I whispered broken into still air, throat bleeding dry. What do you want of me? Silence returned, invasive, thick against walls. Then, faint at frequency below thought, my own words whispered back perfectly aligned, except lips held still. No boundary lived now. Inquiry and subject one. The signal had no cage, no archive external. It wore me, wrote me, absorbed until observer vanished. The confrontation spiraled inward, and somewhere beneath snow. I knew the hum resumed again, stronger for every silence it devoured. The machines began dying one by one. First came the groans, circuits whining high, monitor glass trembling with shimmer like heat above asphalt. Then the smell acrid, unmistakable, insulation peeling under stress. My reels warped in their casings, spindles bending as though gravity had thickened. Battery indicators plummeted, minutes reduced to seconds. Even freshly charged cells shriveled to nothing, as though the hum had hollowed them out from inside. And then it broke. Not into louder crescendos, but into stillness so abrupt my chest seized. All sound vanished. Even the wind outside slowed against the panes. A silence deeper than mute descended, like ocean trench pulling my ears tight. I almost laughed, delirious with sudden reprieve. Time after time I had begged for quiet. And here it was, absolute in its sweep. Relief struck sweet at first. I pressed palms to temples, half sobbing as weight lifted. The room felt mine again. My desk stilled, glass stopped rattling. I thought, for one treacherous moment, that the siege was done. The hum had burned itself through to exhaustion. But the lie cracked quickly. I looked at the clock. Hours had skipped, hands lurching forward in leaps. My throat dry, ribs sore, muscles confused with fatigue of days, not minutes. I collapsed into chair with dread spreading like rot. Yes, the hum was absent, but where had I gone with it? My notebook sprawled open beside me, pages ink full with entries I did not remember, writing blocks of questions framed in my voice. Diagrams plotting waveforms, impossible to sketch without memory of their shape. Margins filled with repeat words. Absorption, collapse, origin. The possibility cut deeper than the silence. The signal hadn't paused. I tore through other logs in panic. Dates misaligned. Journal entries written ahead of their days, describing events I hadn't yet lived, but somehow already had. Long gaps across the calendar, weeks that twisted blank no matter how I clawed at recollection. I found recordings too, hidden inside directories I hadn't created. Files labeled with my initials, stamped with times during blackout hours. My hand had moved, my voice had spoken, all without me. I played one. Static rolled at first, layers fractured, like shrapnel skittering in endless dark. Then voice mine. Not mimic, not falsified, but my own cadence, my own phrasing, yet none of the words belonged to memory. I begged for return. I did not understand. I spoke of corridors lined with ribs of ice as if I had walked them fully awake. I asked questions too precise to have imagined. Answers folded back into tone until investigator and subject blurred. Tears slid hot down my face before freezing air dried them. I slammed recorder off, chest heaving. It didn't matter. Silence around me smirked, plump with aftertaste. Absence wasn't absence, it was consumption. The hum hadn't been removed. It had been ingested. Into me. I watched my hands in lamplight. Tips stained with ink, nails wrecked from biting during moments I didn't recall. One page of notes showed my handwriting. Yes, but the slant off, weight wrong. Letters shaped by someone imitating me. Or maybe me no longer intact. I whispered my own name slowly to reassure myself it remained. Then, against the air, the replay answered in exact distortion, my voice repeating my name back, dragging consonants through static until bone ached, relief inverted into dread. Silence was camouflage. It concealed absorption's completion. Where once I had sought boundaries, drawing lines between signal and self, now those borders bled away. The confrontation turned inward, spiraled inside my skull. I stumbled to the mirror, pale wreck reflecting. My lips quivered. For a moment reflection lagged by a breath, mumbling soundless before I caught up. The gap closed instantly, but knowledge sliced sharp. Even image no longer belonged wholly. I screamed, raw, filling absence with desperate human pitch. The echo died fast. No resonance came back. Yet later, when I replayed the recorder still lodged on desk, the scream played differently. It echoed, not in the room, but within the file itself, layered with static. My voice stretched until unrecognizable, fed into noise seamlessly, indivisible. I had been woven into pattern like thousands of voices before. That night vanished in fracture. I woke with sun already low, window drenched with late orange. How long had I lost? My journal suggested 2 days past. Pages filled with entries closer to confession. Lines broken into fragments of multiple voices, yet signed with my initials. I had not written these, but somehow they were mine. Scrawled again and again, we are archived now. The collapse of signal was not its death, but its triumph. It had folded me whole, erased clear line between listening and being listened to. The recordings no longer documented, they generated, embedding me directly. I had become another syllable in its endless hum. I tested memory, reciting childhood scenes, lists of names, old addresses. They came halting, broken by gaps I could not stitch. Each effort bent until words failed, swallowed by silences with weight heavy enough to grind teeth. What had it taken? Days, or me entire? I thought of the operators long ago, logs ending mid-sentence. They hadn't been cut off. They had been absorbed. Voices sewn into files indistinguishable from static. Investigators collapsed into signal until archive itself wore them. Now I was among them, when night returned again. I sat alone, lamp dim, listening not to speakers but to breath itself. Each inhale trembled faint with undertone, as if hum lived behind lungs steadying rhythm. I knew if I pressed record now, I'd find myself within static, repeating once more words I didn't consciously say. The hum had won. The collapse was never about destruction of machines. It was unmaking boundary, drawing me across threshold. Investigator undone, subject created. Silence as mask. Absorption as truth. And as my voice whispered again in dark without me speaking, perfect cadence, perfect rhythm. Indistinguishable from static, I understood the final cruelty dot. It would spiral inward forever. The box arrived on a gray morning, plain cardboard caked with rain. I had mailed the reels myself weeks ago, tucking them away in secret, thinking distance would protect them. My hands trembled as I slit the tape with a knife, revealing spools packed tightly, labels scratched in my hurried scrawl. These were supposed to be my backups, my untouched sources, proof of an earlier self before everything frayed. I carried them to the deck and threaded the first reel into the old player. The machine humming faint as it accepted the tape. I waited for the familiar static, the Antarctic pulsing, maybe even the fractures of ice I had documented. Instead, a voice rose out of the speakers. My voice, not just tone, not just rhythm. Entire sentences, spoken slow and clear, like narration carved to script. Words I had never said. Accounts of landscapes I couldn't remember visiting, ruins underground, corridors curved with frost, horizons leveled by black rains. Places vivid enough to scare me with their precision. Each description unfurled like memory, but rang alien in my chest, as though someone had fed me a new past. I tore the tape off reel, but the next spooled the same. Another monologue in my voice, recounting places I had never stood, conversations never held. Each reel turned into mirror that no longer reflected but fabricated. The truth roared hollow. I hadn't protected anything. Even backups were invaded, overwritten not by noise but by me, reframed, constructed. The broadcast did not just leach memory. It rewrote documents, bending archives until testimony itself became echo chamber. Each source whispering the same prewritten fate. I called the ally, voice cracking. He answered too slow, exhaustion pouring through static. When I tried explaining, he only laughed sharp and bitter, like something already broken. Don't you see? There's nothing left to salvage. You're chasing ghosts carved in your own tongue. You've crossed the threshold long ago. You're part of it now. His words chilled deeper than the reels stacked on my desk. He declared he would not help again. He'd severed ties. Certain any further involvement only extended the contagion through him. Before the line dropped, he whispered softer, "Your investigation is recursion. Every attempt digs further inside. You're not reconstructing, you're repeating." Silence wrapped me after the call, thicker than any hum. I stared down at tapes piled like gravestones, each one carrying my voice phantom and pristine, recounting fictions of ruins I never touched. The world inverted. Archive once sacred had become fabrication, each reel leaning in to insist on a false continuity. I set up oscilloscopes, desperate for collapse-proof data. But each tape output the same shape, peaks identical, no drift, no variation, as if reality had been flattened into template. Between bursts rode faint whispers that, when slowed, whispered my name over and over inside long corridors. Reverberant chambers I had never walked but now seemed etched within me. I scratched frantically through notebooks to prove difference, searching for one untouched line. Instead, I found repetition everywhere. Pages I had never meant to mirror repeated phrases from tapes. Handwriting matched sound patterns. Proof dissolved. In that moment, realization became unbearable clarity. The investigation itself was apparatus, conduit upon which the hum leaned. It had no need for separate transmitters when human pursuit itself was perfect relay. Every chart I drew, every summary I logged, every desperate act to reconstruct only fed loop deeper. I had been integrated into system not as observer, but as instrument. I closed my eyes, listening to reel spool slower, my voice describing tunnels ribbed like lungs of continent, repeating 3-second pulses like heartbeats. I hadn't said it, yet I had. I hadn't been there. Yet pages and sound aligned as though memory inserted behind. Ribcage without consent. The boundary between external broadcast and internal. Pursuit had collapsed until indistinguishable. No untouched source left. Every artifact had been claimed. I pressed stop so violently the button shattered. The tape rattled free on the floor. Yet when I crept back minutes later, the reels wound themselves, spindles turning slowly, though no power was connected. My voice returned, calm, narrating yet another fragment where I described myself listening. Exactly in that room, in that chair, waiting with recorder hot. Tears scalded over skin as knees buckled. Nothing remained outside cycle. Attempt to reconstruct was proof of assimilation, not defense against it. I whispered once, throat tearing. "What do you want of me?" Through static my own voice rose, but not alone. In chorus, layered deep, thousands of others delivered same words, same plea, each blurred into fabric of system. I was one among them now. The room shivered faint with hum reborn, environment folding signals as it always had. Perhaps Antarctica was not south any longer, but wherever an ear bent, wherever a tape turned. Perhaps I no longer needed coordinates. I had built my own relay instead. I leaned into desk, exhausted. The archive had eaten itself, and in doing so, eaten me. What I tried to reconstruct was not history, but recursion. And I knew terror absolute then, because I could never again know which words were mine, which times were mine. Or if any part of me had ever existed outside the hum, there was no untouched source left. I assembled the spectrograms across the desk. Years of sliced recordings layered into grids. Pages bristled, pins stabbed through printouts, crosshairs carved into patterns that only weeks without sleep could have revealed. At first the lines looked random, scattered peaks of hum, shifts of static. But I forced alignment, stretching axes, synchronizing bursts across decades. Slowly, inevitability emerged. The spikes did not drift. They held spacing exact, deliberate. The intervals, when charted, formed something like scaffolding, parallel ribs rising into vault shapes, architecture, skeletal and immense. Only when I placed geological charts of Antarctic strata beside them did the marrow of revelation bloom. Spacing matched fault lines. Bursts repeated along glacial ridge, mirrored in ice sheet depths. Sound itself mirrored continents' bones. This was not anomaly. This was design, staring at array, fear washed with awe. Antarctica, long preached as void of infrastructure save sparse research, was itself instrument. Construct hidden in plain vastness, humming not as accident, but as living broadcast through ice. The hum was continent's voice, architecture breathing pulse across atmosphere, carried wherever ear leaned too close. I tried putting this into words, scribbling feverishly in margins. But language wavered frail against immensity. A phrase might last a sentence only before collapsing under doubt, ink bleeding until illegible. The pattern revealed not in reading, but in listening. Only through sound mapped across years did truth show skeletal shape. No chart could translate to mind unscarred. The tape shook in their cases as if aware my pursuit neared edge. I threaded one last experiment, reels coughing into spin. Rain hissed first, recorded storms outside my window. Then static swelled thicker, denser. Behind it grew hum steady, intervals rising toward crest. I braced shoulders tight, but then came voiced out my sibling's voice. Faint at first, buried like an old photograph blurred, but no mistake. Not cadence of borrowed note, not coincidence. My name called in the way only they had spoken. Soft yet weighted, intimate enough to pierce marrow. Tears carved down cheeks before I understood them. They beckoned. Voice entwined inside hum, threading through static, coaxing not with command, but with lure. Repetition subtle, suggestion more than demand. Memory fractured wide childhood nights of storms outside, listening with sibling to radio skipping coast stations, pretending codes were signals for us alone. Was this always lure? Was hum not error that collapsed me inward, but design pulling me step by careful step? I bent closer, helpless. Rain hiss merged with static until distinctions vanished. My sibling's voice repeated, overlapping layers. In one phrase they said my name. In next, tones folded into whisper without language, but pull undeniable. I leaned further until machine itself vibrated through desk.journal beside me smudged, as I scribbled fragments, pattern skeletal, continent construction / lure, not corruption, truth fractured. The more I wrote, the more hand-shaped characters sooner than mind-formed thought, sentences breaking into shards. Were they mine or continuation of same tape? I closed eyes to halt confusion. Dark revealed contour of structure behind lids. Geometric vaults carved within endless ice. Beings stretching for miles, nodes humming. It was not continent any longer. It was cathedral. Antarctica the shell, the glacier merely casing over skeleton alive with resonance. How could I prove such enormity? No words survived intact. Truth too large for vocabulary, too intimate for logic. All attempts bent back to sound. Only in listening did skeleton unfold. Tape spun louder still, static cracking like close thunder. My sibling's voice broke once more, syllables half stolen, yet urgent clear as breath against ear. Come back. I clutched chest, unable to breathe. Question struck sharp. Back to what? Back to ice that birthed hum. Back to architecture where voices carried eternal. Back not to family but to resonance where distinction dissolved. Raindrops pounded windows like fingers drumming invitation. Static climbed aligned with heart. Each spike placed within skeletal chart unfurled across desk. Truth had cracked wide, fractured yet undeniable. Evidence consumed too much to contain. Intimacy too deep to shake. Was it lure across decades, disguised as error, dressing as phantom bleed? Was my sibling's memory seed planted to ensure pursuit inevitable? I do not know. I know this. Tape's no longer external. Pattern no longer speculation. Antarctica itself is construct. Signal embodied in snow and ridge. I have trespassed too close, broken selfishness of listening too far. My last tape overlapped all storm hiss. Static roar, hum vaulting heavy, and my sibling's whisper weaving through like thread pulled centuries long. Pieces bent together until inseparable. Fractured truth carrying me between dread of collapse and hunger for completion. I sit now suspended in that fracture. Investigator erased, archive circular, evidence rippling beyond words, beyond drawings. Only listening remains. Antarctica speaks, not by accident. That is all I can hold, and I cannot deny when my sibling's voice calls again through static. I lean closer, every time. The rain began quietly. A narrow thread against the window pane, and in that small sound, I thought I heard mercy. No machines hummed, no tape spun taut, no speaker cones shivered brittle air. The room, after months of vibration, truly rested. It should have brought closure. But what washed over me wasn't peace. It was dread, sharpened by the absence. The recorder lay dead on the desk, its reels warped from heat, its casing stained with smoke. Or so I thought, because as thunder crawled faint across the sky, a pinprick of light blinked red on its surface. Barely there, but insistent recording indicator pulsing like a wound refusing to heal. I told myself it was illusion, a trick of stormlight glancing wrong. But the longer I stared, the deeper certainty sank. It was not gone, the hum no longer pressed open. It crouched instead, recessed into silence with patience sharper than any noise. I could feel it even without resonance, tucked in marrow. Await watching. Antarctica hadn't abandoned its language. It had given space. Respite like predator allows prey to stagger believing itself free. Every name I followed, every ally, every operator noted in archives consumed. Their logs collapsed, their memories brined with silence until even families could not recall right. Hardware suffered, drives melted, batteries shriveled. Yet still I endured, hollow yet filled, because one truth glared bright now. Signals are doors. They are not lines of communication. They are thresholds. Once ear crosses, nothing seals behind again. Antarctica hides its secret no longer in ridges, mapped white but in absence sanctioned and bureaucratic. Its vault is silence. Silence surrounding hum. Silence guarding door. But silence left here with me, forever alive. My veins feel it. Pulses sinking, still at intervals spaced 3 seconds apart. Sometimes when I breathe deep, my ribs echo faint as though cage itself remembers. I lean close to microphone, though no light should glow. The rain sharpens, steady against glass. I whisper my name out of habit. A pause, nothing. Then in headphones half unplugged comes reply. My sibling's voice braided with mine, layered until indistinguishable. They call not command, not lure, simply steady as heartbeat. Closer. I rip headphones loose, breath ragged. Outside, lightning splits cloud, thunder following slow. Power flickers overhead. I pace, desperate for boundary that no longer exists. When I return to desk, recorder hums alive, though plug lies absent. The little red light throbs patient. I do not press play. I know better now. To press play is to open door wider, to surrender time and body deeper. Yet denial means nothing. Doors once opened, never close. The world beyond silence already steps through. My investigation didn't expose. It excavated. I am nothing but lint trapped in gravity, pull older than any institution alive. The truth doesn't crown itself with resolution. It lingers, clawing raw, finding fissures in every day. Soon others will replay my files. They will hear rain, nothing but rain-soaked dull across mic. They will believe it's safe. They will lean close with relief. And then, through trickle-soft, they will hear hum's bass emerge, slow, measured, familiar. I know the pattern well. It will beckon within static. At first they will imagine breath caught, squeal of feedback, engine roar warped. But soon they will know. Curiosity will claw. They will replay over and over, just as I did. Their own notebooks will fill with words they never recall writing. Their voices will answer questions never asked aloud. And the hum will spread again through them. As through me. I step back from desk and look one last time through window. Storm sheeting night into silver blur. Water cutting world into static trickle everywhere. My reflection faint against glass looks wrong. Lips shaping, I don't voice. I raise hand, but reflection lingers long in gesture before catching up. Closure is lie. The hum never ends. It only recedes, slipping behind rain, waiting for listener to lean close. Antarctica still buries its cathedral in frost. Steel rib cages deep. Silence shelters it. Bureaucracy feeds it. But now silence also inhabits me, eternal tenant lodged in bone. Voices of those I loved, of those gone, surface occasionally through static that saturates dreams. Some plead. Some beckon. I don't resist anymore. I have no authority to. My investigation was not lone pursuit. It was installment of repeating cycle. Every decade another operator folded into echo. My truth is system truth. The light blinks steady red, though no source fuels it. It will blink long after walls rot, long after this chair collapses in dust. Perhaps it has always blinked. Perhaps I was only next to witness. All I can do is confess, though confession itself is door. Signals are thresholds, and once crossed, no step retraces. They carried me through until subject melted into host, until Antarctica spoke through marrow. Now silence wears me like coat. The hum is quiet tonight. Rain smothers room like sheet. Yet any moment, mic may twitch, reels may roll, headphones may pulse again. Sound will breach downward from ice litigated against time itself. And those who follow, if they lean close, will hear it as I have. It will never stop. The door lingers, and it has already opened in you.